Before we delve into this gripping narrative, please share in the comments where you're tuning in from to experience this poignant tale. The kindness that changed a life. It had been one of those long, exhausting days, the kind where every minute dragged on, and all I wanted was to grab a quick meal and head home. The rain drizzled steadily outside, painting the city streets in shimmering reflections of neon signs and flickering streetlights. I found myself in my usual late-night diner, a small but cozy place that served the best pancakes in town. The kind of place where strangers shared tables when the seats were full, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the soft hum of conversation. That night, I noticed them almost immediately. A couple sat near the window, shivering slightly in their damp, threadbare clothes. Their hands clutched each other's, a silent exchange of warmth and reassurance. They weren't eating. They had a menu in front of them, but they barely glanced at it. Instead, they stole hesitant glances at the plates of steaming food passing by, as if debating whether they should order or simply leave. Something about them caught my attention. Maybe it was the way the man protectively wrapped his arm around the woman's shoulders, his thumb absently rubbing small circles into her sleeve. Or maybe it was the woman's eyes, tired but filled with a quiet dignity, as if she refused to let her circumstances define her. A waitress approached them, her voice kind but firm. "Would you like to order something?" The man cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Just some water for now." We're waiting for someone." It was a lie. Anyone could see it. I had seen people like them before, people struggling, holding on to their pride, even when their stomachs were empty. And for some reason, something inside me wouldn't let me look away. I signaled the waitress before I could change my mind. "Whatever they want, put it on my tab," I said quietly. "Just don't tell them." She smiled knowingly. "You got it." Minutes later, plates of warm food appeared in front of them. A steaming bowl of soup, slices of fresh bread, and a plate of scrambled eggs and sausage. The woman's hands trembled as she picked up her spoon, as if she couldn't believe it was real. The man looked around in confusion. "We didn't order this." "It's on the house," the waitress said smoothly. A little kindness from someone who cares. For a moment, they hesitated, unsure whether to accept it. But hunger won out. They ate slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid the food might disappear. They barely spoke, only pausing to glance at each other with small, grateful smiles. I watched from a distance, pretending not to notice. I didn't need a thank you. I just wanted to know that for one night, at least, they wouldn't go to bed hungry. I left the diner before they finished, slipping out into the cold night with my hands stuffed into my pockets. It felt like such a small thing, buying a meal for two strangers. But somehow, it had left a warmth inside me that even the chilly air couldn't steal. I didn't expect anything in return. I never could have imagined how that one simple act of kindness would change my life forever. I had nearly forgotten about that night. Life had a way of sweeping you up in its current, and before I knew it, weeks had passed since that cold evening at the diner. The days blurred together. Work, bills, deadlines, and the same old routine. I had never expected anything to come from that small act of kindness. It had been a moment, a fleeting gesture, a quiet decision that I thought had ended the moment I walked out the door. But life is strange. Because sometimes the things you least expect to matter end up becoming the most important chapters of your story. A chance encounter. It started with an email. I was at work, buried under an endless pile of tasks when my phone buzzed. I barely glanced at it at first, probably just another spam message or some generic company update. But then, something caught my eye. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the subject line read, "A thank you from someone you helped." Curiosity piqued. I clicked it open. "Dear sir, you don't know me, but a few weeks ago, you did something that changed my life. You didn't ask for recognition. You didn't even wait for a thank you. But I have thought about you every single day since that night. My wife and I were at a very low point. That evening at the diner, we had been out of options, out of hope. We had lost everything: our jobs, our apartment, and nearly our faith in humanity. We had walked into that restaurant with nothing but a few coins in our pockets, hoping we could warm up before heading back to the shelter for another restless night. And then, out of nowhere, a miracle happened. That meal you paid for, it wasn't just food. It was a sign that we weren't invisible, that someone in this world still saw us as people, as human beings worth kindness. That meal gave me the strength to make one last effort to turn my life around. I want you to know, I did. Because of that small act of kindness, something inside me shifted. I woke up the next morning and made the decision that I would not let my circumstances define me. I found work. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I picked myself up, piece by piece, and rebuilt what I had lost. And today, I am writing to you from my new office. I have a stable job now. My wife and I have a home again. We are not just surviving. We are living. And it all started because one stranger, on a rainy night, decided to care. I don't know if you remember me, but I will never forget you. I don't know how to repay you, but I would like to meet you. I want to thank you in person. Please, if you are willing, let me take you to dinner. My treat this time. With eternal gratitude, Daniel Harper. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the words, feeling the weight of them settle deep in my chest. A lump formed in my throat. I had never expected this. Not in a million years. To me, it had been a simple meal. A small, fleeting moment of kindness. But to him, it had been life-changing. I hesitated for a long time before replying. Dear Daniel, I am truly humbled by your words. I remember that night well, and I am beyond happy to hear that things have turned around for you and your wife. I never expected anything in return, but your email means more to me than I can express. I would love to meet you. Dinner sounds great. Let me know when and where. Best regards, James Carter. I hit send, exhaling slowly. Life was about to surprise me again. An unexpected invitation. Daniel chose an upscale restaurant, one of those places I'd only ever seen in movies, the kind where the waiters wore tuxedos, and the menu had no prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. I felt out of place the moment I walked in. My worn-out leather jacket and scuffed boots didn't quite fit in with the polished marble floors and glistening chandeliers. But then I saw him. Daniel. He looked completely different from the man I had seen that night at the diner. His hair was neatly combed, his suit crisp and expensive. He carried himself with confidence, but the moment he saw me, his face broke into the most genuine smile I had ever seen. James, he called, striding forward and shaking my hand firmly. I can't tell you how much this means to me. I smiled, still taken aback by the transformation. I should be saying the same thing. We sat down, and for the next hour, he told me his story, how he had once been a successful entrepreneur before a series of devastating losses had wiped out everything he had. How he and his wife had spent months struggling, losing more hope with each passing day. How that meal, just one simple meal, had been the spark that pulled him out of the abyss. By the time dessert arrived, he looked at me with an unreadable expression. You didn't just buy me a meal, James. You reminded me of who I was. You gave me back my dignity. And for that, I will always be in your debt. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything, Daniel. You did the hard part. You fought to get back on your feet. He smiled knowingly. Maybe so. But I believe in repaying kindness with kindness. Then he slid something across the table. An envelope. I frowned. What's this? Open it. I hesitated before peeling it open. Inside was a check. A check with more zeros than I had ever seen in my life. My hands trembled. Daniel, I can't. Yes, you can, he interrupted gently. And you will. I looked at him, stunned. "You gave me a second chance when I had nothing. Now, I want to do the same for you. Consider it an investment in whatever dream you've been putting on hold." I stared at the check, my mind racing. I had never expected anything in return. But here it was, the kindness I had given coming back to me in ways I could have never imagined. And I knew, in that moment, that my life was about to change forever. I must have looked ridiculous sitting there, my mouth slightly open, the check still clutched between my fingers. My mind struggled to wrap itself around the number written in bold ink. It wasn't just a generous amount. It was life-changing. And I didn't know what to do. A decision that felt impossible. "Daniel," I finally said, my voice hoarse, This is too much. I can't accept this." He leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "I thought you might say that." I swallowed hard, setting the check down carefully on the table, as if it might explode. I wasn't expecting anything in return. That meal. I didn't do it because I wanted something back. Daniel nodded. "I know. That's why I trust you with it." I ran a hand through my hair, still overwhelmed. "I appreciate this, I really do, but I don't know if I can take it. I mean, this is." "An opportunity," Daniel interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Not charity. Not a handout. It's an opportunity, James, and I need you to take it." I exhaled slowly. "But why? Why me?" Daniel folded his hands together on the table, his gaze steady. "Because you're the kind of person who helps without expecting anything in return. That tells me that if you had the chance, you'd do something good with this." I shook my head, laughing softly in disbelief. I wouldn't even know where to start. "Then start with this," he said, tapping the check with his finger. "Start with asking yourself what you would do if money wasn't the thing holding you back. What dream have you buried because life got in the way?" I froze, because I did have a dream. One I had given up on long ago. A dream long forgotten. As a kid, I had always wanted to open my own business. Something small, something that made a difference. A coffee shop maybe, or a bookstore. Somewhere people could go not just to buy something, but to feel at home. But life had gotten in the way. Bills had piled up. Responsibilities had taken priority. And little by little, that dream had faded into the background, buried beneath the weight of survival. Until now. Now someone was handing me the chance to bring it back to life. I looked at Daniel, still unsure. "What if I fail?" He chuckled. "Then you try again." I let out a slow breath, staring down at the check. My fingers traced over the ink, the numbers still surreal. Was I really about to do this? Could I? For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. The leap of faith. It took me a week to make the decision. 7 days of staring at that check, debating, doubting, questioning whether I deserved something like this. 7 days of telling myself all the reasons why it wouldn't work. But then on the 8th day, I woke up and thought, what if it does? That single thought was enough. So I did it. I quit my job. I took the money and put it toward a small space in the heart of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it had potential. The kind of place that could become something special. Over the next few months, I poured everything into making it a reality. Early mornings, late nights, countless hours of planning, learning, figuring things out as I went. There were moments of doubt, moments where I thought I had made a mistake. But every time I wavered, I remembered Daniel's words. Then you try again. And so I kept going. Until finally, one day, it was real. Opening day. The doors to Second Chances Cafe opened on a crisp autumn morning. It wasn't just a business. It was a statement. A reminder that sometimes all someone needs is for someone else to believe in them. I made sure the cafe had a pay-it-forward board where customers could buy an extra coffee or meal for someone in need. I hired people who had been struggling to find work. People who, like Daniel, just needed that one break. And on the very first day, as I stood behind the counter, ready to serve my first customer, the door opened. Daniel walked in. He looked around, taking in the warm lights, the smell of fresh coffee, the quiet hum of conversations already beginning. And then he met my eyes and smiled. "You did it," he said. I smiled back. "I did." He walked up to the counter and pulled out his wallet. "One coffee, please," he said. "And add another to the board." I laughed, shaking my head as I handed him the first coffee on the house. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was the story of everyone who had ever needed a second chance. And it all started with a single meal. I used to believe that life moved in straight lines. You worked hard, you made your way forward. And if you were lucky, things worked out the way you planned. But sitting in my cafe that evening, watching the glow of the hanging lights bounce off the warm wooden tables, I realized something. Life doesn't move in straight lines. It loops, it twists, it doubles back on itself, bringing people, moments, and choices full circle in ways you never expect. I thought back to that rainy night in the diner, the moment I had slipped a few dollars to a waitress for two strangers who looked like they had nowhere else to turn. I had no idea back then what it would lead to. No idea that kindness, like a stone skipped across water, could ripple outward into something far beyond what I could see. But here I was, in my own cafe, my own dream, brought to life by that same ripple. And yet, I had no idea that the biggest twist in the story was still to come. A familiar face. It happened on a slow evening, just as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. I was wiping down the counter when the door creaked open. The little bell above it jingled, a sound I had come to love. A woman stepped inside. She hesitated, her eyes scanning the cafe as if she wasn't sure she belonged there. Her coat was thin, her hands tucked into her sleeves for warmth. There was something familiar about her, though I couldn't place it right away. She approached the counter slowly. "Hi," she said, her voice cautious. "Hi," I said back, offering a smile. "What can I get you?" She bit her lip. I don't actually have any money." But I saw the board outside, the one where people pay for a meal in advance. I was wondering if... "Of course," I said before she could finish. "Take a seat. I'll bring you something warm." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." She found a table near the window, sitting quietly as I prepared a sandwich and a cup of soup. And then, as I turned to bring it over, it hit me. I knew her, or at least I had seen her before. Not here, not in my cafe, but in that diner. She was the woman from that night, the same woman who had sat beside Daniel, shivering in her thin clothes, staring at a menu she couldn't afford. I felt a jolt in my chest. Did she remember me? I walked over, setting the food down in front of her. "Here you go." She looked up, eyes wide with gratitude. "This is too much," she whispered. "A sandwich and soup. I thought maybe just coffee." I smiled. "Eat first. Worry later." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You remind me of someone." My heart skipped. "Really?" I asked carefully. She nodded, stirring her soup. "A long time ago, my husband and I were going through a rough patch. We had lost everything. One night, we walked into a diner, just looking for a little warmth. We didn't have money, but somehow, food just showed up at our table, paid for by someone we never got to thank." I swallowed hard. "That must have meant a lot to you." "It did." She smiled, lost in the memory. "It changed everything for us. My husband found work the very next day. We got back on our feet, built our lives back from nothing." She sighed, her expression shifting. "But things happen. Life knocks you down again. And sometimes, no matter how hard you fight, you end up back where you started." I sat down across from her. "Where's your husband now?" Her fingers tightened around the spoon. "Daniel passed away last year." The air left my lungs. I had to remind myself to breathe. He was doing so well, she continued, her voice soft. We were doing well. But then he got sick. We fought as hard as we could, but medical bills. She shook her head. It's funny. You can go from having everything to having nothing so quickly. And just like before, I found myself sitting in a restaurant, wondering if I should just leave before embarrassing myself. I gripped the edge of the table. I wish I could have thanked the person who helped us that night, she murmured. They had no idea how much it changed our lives. I opened my mouth, closed it. This wasn't how I thought this story would come back around. The man I had helped had turned around and changed my life. And now life had brought his wife back to me, right at the moment she needed help again. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say, it was me. I was the one who paid for that meal. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about me. This was about her. She didn't need to know. She didn't need to feel like she owed me anything. She just needed kindness. So instead I said, well, tonight, someone else is paying it forward for you. She blinked at me, eyes glossy. Why? I smiled. Because sometimes life loops back around in ways we don't expect. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, as if she understood something even I couldn't put into words. She ate her meal slowly, savoring every bite. And when she was finished, she stood, pulling her coat tighter around her. Thank you, she whispered. I just nodded. And as she walked out the door, I knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't the end of the story. It never was. Because kindness doesn't move in straight lines. It ripples. It loops. It finds its way back to where it's needed the most. I used to think stories had endings, that one chapter would close neatly before another one began. But life isn't like that. Life is an endless series of connections, of ripples spreading out into the unknown. Sometimes we never see the way our kindness shapes the world. Other times, it circles back to us in ways we could never have predicted. And sometimes, just sometimes, it leads us home. An envelope on the table. 2 weeks passed after that night. I kept thinking about her, Daniel's wife. How life had pulled her back into the storm. How, despite everything, she still carried that quiet dignity. I had wanted to do more for her, but I knew from experience that pride was a tricky thing. You couldn't force someone to accept help. You could only leave the door open and hope they walked through it. Then, one evening, just as I was closing up the cafe, I found something. An envelope. It had been slipped under the door, its edges slightly crumpled. No return address, no markings, just my name written in neat, careful handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a single note. James, I know who you are. I knew the moment you sat down across from me that night. I wanted to say something, but I wasn't ready. Maybe part of me didn't want to believe that life could truly come full circle like this. But I see it now. I see what you built. I see what you've done with the kindness that was given to you. And I see now that it's time for me to do the same. I won't let this be the end of my story. Thank you for everything. Claire. I stared at the note, my heart pounding. She knew. She had known all along. And yet, she hadn't said anything. Not because she didn't appreciate it, but because, like me, she had needed time to accept that kindness wasn't about debts. It wasn't about who owed who. It was about what we did with the second chances we were given. A year later, I didn't hear from Claire again for a long time. Life moved forward, as it always does. The cafe grew, its walls filled with laughter, conversations, and stories of people who, like me, had once needed a hand to hold on to. The Pay It Forward board was always full. Every single day, people left meals, coffees, and little notes of encouragement for strangers they would never meet. And then one afternoon, just as the lunch rush was dying down, the door swung open. I looked up, wiping my hands on a towel. And there she was, Claire. But she wasn't alone. A small group of people stood behind her, men and women of different ages, some carrying boxes, others holding signs. And on those signs, written in bold letters, were the words, "Second Chances Shelter, grand opening today." I blinked. Claire stepped forward, smiling. "I wanted you to be the first to know." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. She laughed softly. "You gave me a second chance, James. Now I'm giving that chance to others. A shelter, a job training program, a fresh start, whatever they need." I felt something catch in my throat. "You did this," I whispered. She nodded. "Because you showed me how." I looked at the people behind her, their faces filled with hope. People who, like Daniel and Claire once had, just needed someone to see them, to believe in them. And in that moment, I understood. This was never just about one meal. It was never just about me or Daniel or Claire. It was about the ripples, the moments of kindness that carried further than we could ever see. The story had never really ended. It had just begun again. One last act of kindness. That night, I walked over to the Pay It Forward board. I picked up a fresh slip of paper, and with steady hands, I wrote, "For whoever needs it next, your second chance is waiting." Then I pinned it to the board. Smiling to myself, I turned off the cafe lights and stepped outside, walking into a world that I knew, without a doubt, would be changed by kindness again and again. Because kindness doesn't have an ending, only beginnings. The end and the beginning. Final thoughts on the story. This ending brings everything full circle, while still leaving the reader with a sense of continuation. Because kindness, just like life, never truly stops. It moves, it grows, and it always finds a way back.